G'day guys, I was recently joined by Wallace from Warphammer. You may have heard of him before. He's got a brilliant YouTube channel. He's got a massive website that's absolutely dripping with Chaos Tactics articles, and he's been the #1 ranked Chaos player in the ITC for the last 2 years in a row. So I couldn't resist the opportunity to get this bloke on and have a conversation. We talked a lot about the new World Eaters, some of his thoughts on competitive archetypes, some of his thoughts on the various different ways that you can run World Eaters. We also did a bit of a deep dive on how to ally Chaos Knights in with the World Eaters and how to ally in things like Chaos Demons. And then we talked a little bit about his future plans for Chaos, what he's working on, into Cogs of Vashtor and things like that, as well as plenty of general things about Warhammer 40k, 10th edition, that sort of stuff. So with that being said, here is the conversation. Hope you enjoy it, and stick around to the end because we've got some discount codes and things like that that you may be interested in. And yeah, enjoy the conversation.
Welcome to the Black God.
Alrighty guys, I have been blessed to have Wallace from Warphammer join me today. Wallace, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do, your history with 40k, and the exciting stuff that you're working on?
Hi, so that's me. I'm Wallace. I guess to start, Wallace from Warphammer is pretty accurate because that is where I really started with the whole competitive 40k thing. You might have heard of me from the channel here on YouTube or from our website. But a lot of people also know me because I'm the owner for Tables and Towers, which is the largest Warhammer 40k game store here in the United States. So that's kind of what I do when I'm not on the computer. And then I guess to preface the conversation a little bit, and one of the reasons I'm really excited to talk with you is we're both, Chaos competitive players. I kind of pride myself on playing a little bit of every faction and not so much focusing on any given one per se. And I've been top Chaos for the ITC for 2 years running now. So that's a little bit about me and my background. And I'm really excited to get a chance to talk with you.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I first found your content just scrolling through YouTube and found a bunch of Warhammer videos, watched them, loved them. Then I found your website, went on there and was like, wow, they got a whole ton of articles, some really interesting stuff. One of those articles which really spiked my interest was the how to ally Chaos Knights. And I'd been planning to record this video on this exact topic, going forward with the World Eaters release out now. There's a lot of people trying to think, how can we, shore up the weaknesses in the shooting phase for the World Eaters book? So there's a lot of people asking me to do a video on how to ally Chaos Knights in with your World Eaters. And I keep linking them to that article, but the challenge is that article was written pre-Arcs of Omen, pre-World Eaters Codex. So I was toying around with the ideas of maybe, writing up my own article or coming up with my own video with an updated sort of perspective on this. But then I thought, well, why would I go over those old ground when I can just grab you on and we can talk about the World Eaters Codex, we can talk about this new allies system. Even though 10th edition is right around the corner, I still think we're going to have several months before that happens. And I think people will get a lot of value out of a conversation centered around sort of World Eaters and the way that we can incorporate allies into it, given that you've got plenty of experience with all of these Chaos factions. I couldn't imagine a better guy to talk to about these new allies. So I guess,
you're making me blush.
So I guess the best place to start would be just give us your sort of first thoughts on World Eaters. The Codex hasn't been out for very long, so what are your first thoughts on it? Have you played many games with it? Have you witnessed much? What are your thoughts on competitive archetypes, that sort of stuff, before we get into the sort of more allies-centric part of the video?
So World Eaters are interesting because I think they are emblematic of what GW wants to do in 10th edition in some ways. A lot of the Codex is stripped down to what are its essential parts. If you look at something like an early 9th edition Codex, something like Grey Knights, what you're going to find is you're going to find a lot of unit customization. You're going to find a lot of stratagems that allow you to make really, I guess, unique battle forces in some ways. Like you can take a bunch of different warlord traits, and upgrades and like relics and squads and stuff like that. And the thing about that is, while that is really cool, it is also a lot of labor when it comes to creating an army roster. And it's a lot of information when you're playing against that faction.
Absolutely.
And one thing I've noticed with playing as and against world leaders is that you can very quickly assess the general idea of what they're doing and what their rules are by looking at their data sheet, because or just their army roster, because again, you're kind of limited because you only have that one warlord trait, and the warlord traits in the book are very defining for the way that the faction plays. So right now, when it comes to world eaters, I think there's actually about 3 lists that I would consider fairly competitive. And the first and by far most popular list right now is the Lord Invocatus with 8-bound list.
Yep.
And the general idea how that one works, obviously, is you can get a big pregame move on your core units along with the Lord Invocatus. He has to be your warlord, which kind of recuses you from the ability to bring something like Angron. And what the Lord Invocatus list does is it pressures your opponent really, really well. And if you go first, you can usually push your stuff in their face and punch them pretty hard. And if you go second in the game, you actually just use it to stage a little bit, and you play a more of a objective-oriented game style. The second list, and I think this one's very good as well, even though it's a little bit less popular, is going to be kind of the Disciples of the Red Angel style, which is your Army of Renown style build, where you take Angron plus, like demon allies, and you're going for the extra stratagems it gives you. With that particular build, I've definitely seen a lot more of what I would call a big boy approach. So you're bringing things like Angron and like the Phase Cap Bloodthirster from the Chaos Demons Codex. I think that list is actually still pretty powerful. And I think the third build style is kind of this hodgepodge of Berserker spams with Rhinos.
Yeah.
And that MSU style approach, I think, is still very good, because you have a lot of things to contest objectives, you still do a lot of damage, and it's about stacking up your blood tithe points. So when you look at those as a whole, every single one of those lists is fantastic at melee and has really good options when it comes to like interactive secondary play. Because of that, there's a lot of different ways you can enhance certain parts of your game plan by bringing allies. So I guess we can hop into that now if you want to.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
So
well, just to sort of to further to what you just said about those 3 lists, I think it's really interesting that they stripped so much back from the World Eaters book, yet simultaneously made it so that there was straight out the gate 3 very versatile different lists that were all more or less equally competitive. Like you see these all doing very, very well in various different ways in various different metas. So I think you're right in that they've stripped the codex back, and it's sort of what we can expect out of 10th edition, and it's also clearly the direction that Games Workshop wants us to go in. But it hasn't been stripped back to the point where there's no options in it. There's still plenty of different ways you can do it. You pick your warlord, and then the rest of the list builds around it. But there's plenty of different ways that you can go with that. So yeah, I think it's really exciting. Personally, I've been playing a little bit. I played a few games with the Angron build, where it was just Angron and a ton of Berserkers, a couple of units of 8-bound just to test them out, and just to test out Angron's power. I also played a few with the 8-bound. I've played a few with Exalted 8-bound. I've tried a little bit of each, and enjoyed all of it. So I think it's a really ripper of a codex. It's got a lot of power, and I think a lot of its power is locked to its secondaries. They've got some of the best secondaries in the game. And it sort of feels like even when you're losing the fight, you're absolutely getting crushed, you're still winning because you're just scoring massive on your secondaries, you're heroically intervening onto objectives, you're fighting on death so that even if they push you off the objective, they get killed off of it as well. There's a lot of utility in that primary game as well. So I think it's a really good scoring list, and it's a really good damage dealing list with a lot of flexibility. So I've had a lot of fun with those versions. The one thing I haven't played with much, or any at all, is the allies side of it. So
really?
I'd love to hear your sort of thoughts on what are our options when it comes to allies? What do we gain and lose if we take those allies? And sort of your perspective on the pros and cons.
So, first and foremost, I think your focus on bringing allies needs to be immediately with what is it that those allies bring to the table for you.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different answers to that, depending on what your play style is, what your model selection is, how many do you actually have in your collection, um, and kind of what your goal with those points are. Because there is this definite thing that occurs, I found with World Eaters lists, where you'll get the first like 1,600 points in there real quick, and then the last 400, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what you want to do with.
Yeah.
And why that's an important number is 400 is about how much I think almost all of your ally options are going to run you. Is that like 300 to 400 point range. So I guess we'll start with the Lord Invocatus build, because it was the first one I mentioned. So that build has a couple of different play styles to it. It has an objective-oriented play style, which is you still have berserkers and other smaller units that get up onto the like staging areas of the table, like maybe behind obscuring in the mid-table, and they kind of contest objectives and they threaten charges. But I've seen a lot of people take that to an extreme and then essentially try to build a list with the goal of tabling their opponent. I'm going to push my 8-bound at you, and I'm going to try to table you. And if you're going with the playstyle where you want that hyper aggression, I feel like the Chaos Knights are a fantastic addition to that particular playstyle. And there's a couple of reasons why. And it really is terrain dependent. If you know beforehand there's going to be some good shooting angles or nice lines on the table, I think this option gets significantly better. If it's a really packed or dense board, obviously, or if you're used to playing on like more dense boards at your local game store or at any GTs you attend, I think it falls a little bit in favorability. But when it comes to allying in knights, the most obvious way to do that, and I think the easiest when it comes to scoring points with it, is going to be bringing War Dogs.
Yep.
Because you can take 3 in a Dreadblade detachment. And then depending on what kind of shooting profile that you want from those War Dogs, because I think the way that you almost always will want to do this is you'll want to take a shooting profile rather than something like a Carnivore, which is their melee loadout.
Yeah.
Depending on what one you choose.
Short of melee options. So if you want melee, there's plenty of it already in the book. You don't need to add allies for that.
Exactly. Like if you're playing Thousand Suns, for instance, you might consider taking something like a Carnivore so that you have a fast melee threat. But in the World Eaters Codex, where everything is a melee threat, you might as well get some shooting from them, right? So this is your best option if you want to start adding firepower, ranged firepower to your lists, outside of something goofy like a Khorne Lord of Skulls,
Yeah.
So with the War Dogs, there's a couple of different styles that you can bring. Right now, I'm really enjoying their Armiger equivalents. Those are the War Dog Executioners.
Yep.
And the reason I'm enjoying them is because they're very easy to get value out of. And when I say value, I mean, when I bring Executioners to the table, there will be games, depending on deployment or depending on the matchup, where they get to essentially shoot almost all game untouched.
Yeah,
and the reason for
that, too busy dealing with the 8-bound that you've just thrown in their face, they're not going to be worrying about that. But so before we get too deep into the specifics of which knights to take and that sort of stuff, can you give us just a real brief rundown of the specifics of how you add knights to armies? Because I know a lot of people they get stuck when it comes to the new Arcs of Omen detachment and how allies work in the new sort of whatever you call it season, and how the keywords work and what do you lose and what do you gain, those sorts of things. Give us maybe a TLDR of that, and then we'll talk a little bit more about your preferences for which types of War Dogs to bring and whether it's worth bringing the big abominant guy and that sort of stuff.
Fantastic question. I should start there. You're right. So, okay, when you bring allied knights to your chaos list, you have to bring them as what's called a Dreadblade detachment.
Yep.
In order to get a Dreadblade detachment, essentially you need to bring a super heavy auxiliary detachment, and you need to give them a Dreadblade trait. So there's a list of a bunch of different traits in the Chaos Knights Codex. You have to select one of those. That'll apply to all 3 of your knights. You can't choose one of the normal Chaos Knight houses, like House Herpatrax, for example. And once you've added that super heavy detachment, in order to unlock all of the Dreadblade traits, you need to bring 3 War Dogs. You can't bring 1 or 2 without losing the Dreadblade trait, which the traits are really good, so you want to always have 3 in your unit. And as a general rule, that is going to run you about 450 to 500 points if you are bringing all 3 of the Chaos Knights. I don't think you actually have to. It's just you do lose out on the very effective Dreadblade traits if you do not bring 3 of them. So, as an example, when I was talking about those Executioners, their Dreadblade trait that makes them really nice right now, in my opinion, is the ability to ignore light cover, because it makes their shooting a lot more of a threat into all of these Space Marine oriented lists that we're seeing. And like you've already mentioned, when you push a bunch of models into your opponent's face, because this is all in context of doing the 8-bound spam Lord Invocatus list, they just don't have time to deal with the tanky, invuln save knights that are standing on literally the opposite side of the table, shooting you from like 46 inches away. Because the other thing about Executioners is they're incredibly long range. They can shoot all the way across the table. They can be in the back of your deployment. Like, I had a game with them recently where I was actually playing this list, and it was against Sisters of Battle. They literally could not get any Meltas in range of the knights. So all game, I was just getting to just like pick away at units. And that feels fantastic. So that's one example of something you can do. There's also some arguments for what are called brigands, which are a kind of Chaos Knight that has a chain cannon, which is a 12-shot assault, strength 6, AP 2 gun with damage 1. That gun is really good. Individually, it's really, really good. In addition to that gun, they come with a Melta Spear, which is a essentially like a 2-shot multi-Melta with a 30-inch range. And so between your chain cannon and your multi-Melta, the Brigand, though being slightly shorter range than, say, the Executioner, so it has to get up a little bit closer to your opponent to do its damage, it has an incredible amount of anti-Space Marine and anti-vehicle shooting. One of the challenges with Brigands is because they do have to get closer than the Executioners do, there's going to be less games where they get multiple turns of shooting. But I found that, again, with the 8-bound style list, they do have to focus on your 8-bound before they can put any shooting into those Brigands. So your odds of getting multiple turns with them does go up. And with the Brigands, one of the best traits, in my opinion, is what's called Bold Tyrants, which gives you +1 AP if you're shooting at a target within 18-inch range. But there's a lot of customizability when it comes to Chaos Knights, and that part is super fun, in my opinion. So, like, each of the Chaos Knights has a what's called a Favor of the Dark Gods that you can choose to upgrade them with. It costs you extra points, so you have to be careful because you're already investing a lot into bringing these units to begin with. But you can, for instance, give them like a Corn Mark trait, like the Brass Collar, in order to mess with Psychers a little bit, which is something nice since you don't have a lot of Psychers in your list. And the other example is you're not godlocked when it comes to favors. So you can, for instance, take something like a Zenith Mirror Fates, which allows you to regain CP on 5+ when you spend it.
The temptation to bring a Slaanesh Knight in a World Eaters list just to piss off all the fluff bunnies at the tournament is very tempting. It's almost worth doing it just for that. Even if it was a strategic disadvantage, if it was going to piss off the fluff bunnies, it's a serious temptation just for the trolls.
Yes. I remember I had my highest tournament score for Corn last year had 3 Psychers in it because of allying, which I thought was really funny. But yeah, Chaos Knights are a great option because, again, they provide you with shooting threats. They are expensive, but each of the Chaos Knights does offer you mobile, because they're relatively fast, mobile shooting options that do give you decent anti-armor and decent like Space Marine. The reason I mentioned Executioners first is I really do like Executioners with 8-bound, because I find in a lot of games you can clip an angle with your Executioners on like 1 or 2 units. And if you're able to pick either of those units up and you get those Blood Tithe points, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's like 2 or 3 Blood Tithe points in order to get the +1 charge.
Yeah, 3. I think that's really interesting because I'm a huge fan of the Executioners for that reason, because you can pick up those Blood Tithe points early and therefore spend them in that first turn before you even go in for your big Alpha Strike, which is really exciting. But also because they're such long range, they can actually screen out your backfield whilst contributing to the fight. I think one of the things that World Eaters struggle with is because the whole army wants to push up forward, you're sort of abandoning your backfield. And anything that you do leave in your backfield kind of feels wasted. If you've got 5 Berserkers sitting on a backfield objective, it feels like a waste of points. Why aren't they out there doing damage? And if you've just got, the new Jackals sitting on your backfield, they're too squishy. They're easy to pick up. Your opponent just needs to draw a line on them with 1 unit and they'll blast them. So having those, Executioners sitting back, holding a backfield objective, screening out your, deployment so people can't deep strike in behind you, and contributing to the fight, I think is really, really exciting and valuable.
We're also moving more into a meta, at least at the moment, where Astra Militarum are starting to enter into competitive play. I think a lot of people are getting their hobbying to the level where they have the models now. And we're seeing them become more present at tournaments and more popular tournaments and starting to win events. And the thing about them is Astra Militarum with their mortars, because most of the Astra Militarum lists I see have like a 3x3 on mortars. They will just pick up your Jackals and your Chaos Spawn. So if that's all that you have on your back objective, they'll go, boop, all right, denying you 4 points on the primary.
They won't struggle to pick up Berserkers either. If you've just got a unit of 5 Berserkers, they'll pick them up like it's nobody's business. So I agree. In a meta where those mortars exist, and also not only that, but you've also got the fact that they can deep strike in units behind you. So you want to be screening out your backfield, and you want to be holding your objectives with something that's a lot tougher than just 10 toughness 3, 5 up, 6 up save guys. So yeah, it's you either want to invest in something like a Rhino or something like that to put your objective guys in so that you're holding that objective, or you want to have some kind of vehicle that's contributing. And realistically, a Rhino with Berserkers in it is like 200 points investment minimum. And if you take that 200 points out and put in Executioner, well, it's just as tough. It's holding that backfield, but it's also contributing to the fight from the backfield. So,
yes.
Yeah, I think Executioners are good.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a good fit. Like, because they really should be your anchors. Brigands kind of have to move up the table in order to get, the ranges on things, unless you're playing against another pressure army, something that's also coming at you, which is already kind of your playhouse anyways as a World Eaters player, so you don't necessarily need to be better in those kinds of matchups. But I was thinking specifically with the 8-bound build, I would like Executioners. Now, the other thing is they're 12-inch moving models that have counts as 5 models in OBSEC for the sake of controlling objectives, which is also really nice. So you'll find that in later turns of the game, your War Dogs get to push out and start grabbing midfield objectives. If you go second, I think this is a fantastic purpose for Chaos Knights, because they can all run out and go grab stuff right at the end of the game. So on that note, I guess I should talk about some of these other lists, because I've mentioned now at length some of the stuff you can do with the Chaos Knights. And honestly, I could talk for hours about them, because their custom traits table is super, super in-depth. And they do have a lot of really interesting stratagems. Like, just as a note, one of the marquee stratagems for them is a 2 CP strat, where all of your War Dogs get sixes to hit cause an additional hit in the shooting phase when shooting at one target.
Yeah.
So if you brought like 3 executioners or 3 brigands and your opponent brought, I don't know, a big demon or something like that, like you're playing against chaos demons or whatever, give yourself exploding sixes against that target and roll a bunch of dice at them.
Yeah.
It's just a nice increase in efficiency. So moving a little bit from the 8-bound side to, is it Disciples of the Red Angels, or am I getting the name wrong?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Okay, cool.
Angron and all his demonic boys.
I play Disciples of Bellicor, so that just kind of like triggered in my brain. Maybe it's not called Disciples. Not every army of renown can be called Disciples. But that particular play style is the one that requires that you bring demons. And I believe like that's like the first restriction in its army restrictions, which is a big restriction. But the lucky
huge restriction. Yeah. You can still bring land raiders though. For some reason.
yes, and land raiders, the humble land raider. So that is a huge restriction. But luckily, there are a lot of good models that happen to be Khorne demons, both in the World Eaters Codex, like the Exalted 8-bound, as well as in our ally options with demons. So I'm going to really quickly talk about the demon side of thing. So with demons, there is a ability to bring patrol detachment alongside your main detachment. The only restriction on that is you have to have a 25% of your power levels as, or no more than 25% of your power levels as demons, or you lose all of your like faction abilities.
Yeah.
So in order not to lose anything, you have to play a weird like numbers game with your power levels. So a lot of times, like if you're using Battle Scribe as an example to track your like army roster, you're gonna need to calculate what proportion you have in power levels to like your total. There's a lot of ways you can game that. Like for instance, a unit's power level will double if you get above its starting size.
Yeah. So you put that 6th berserker in the unit, and now it counts as essentially having 10 for purposes of power level. Yeah.
Which is it's a weird restriction. It's the only thing I can think of that really utilizes power levels in the competitive game at the moment. So I don't know. Good on GW for figuring out a use for power levels outside of casual games.
Yeah.
But essentially, that means that about a fourth of your list in points. Now, there is some exceptions to that because, again, like you can game the system a bit.
Yeah.
I found like I've gotten up to like 700 points before without breaking the Demon Patrol restriction, but just kind of that's the framing in your mind. So when you're doing a list building for it, if you want them to be agents of chaos, you got to have that in mind. So for the Disciples of the Red Angel, the thing you definitely want to do is you want to focus on Angron and on the Phase Cap Bloodthirster as being your two kind of big boys, because those two models alone are just a pain for, I would say, about 70% of the factions in the game to deal with.
Absolutely.
Any faction...
They can't kill the phase capped guy because it's got to get through multiple phases doing 8 damage per phase, so it's really hard. And you can't really kill Angron because even if you do kill him, they can just spend the blood tithe to bring him back.
Exactly. And unless they have like really heavy, dedicated ranged shooting, like an example of some armies that can deal with those two threats pretty well would be something like Tau or Guard, because Guard have a relic they take that ignores phase caps.
Yep.
But even in those two examples, you can usually find really good ways to get value out of Angron and the Bloodthirster. And obviously, you can use strategic reserves or start them off the table, which is a great option when you're in those matchups. Because the thing about Angron is, in most tournaments I have attended, you're allowed to select his command ability while he is not on the table. So your aura... that can, for instance, prevent fallbacks is selectable while he's not on the table. if you play against a Tau player and he deep strikes in and he spikes his 9-inch charge and you have no fallback, they pretty much just lose the game.
Yeah.
And that is a really, really nice tool to have when you're bringing Angron. But, like dropping the Bloodthirster directly in front of like a shooting army's face and all they do is shooting is a nightmare for them to deal with, especially if you do something like the Blood Drinker Talisman, which makes him heal when he kills models, or something like the Armor of Scorn, which can shrug off a lot of the damage when shooting and a lot of the mortal wounds that might come this direction. So those two together, I would say, are the big boy brigade that make Disciples of the Red Angel work well.
Yeah.
Now, the rest of your list is usually going to be smaller units of like 8-bound, like 3 or 4 mans of the Exalted 8-bound, which can only go to 3, or like 4 mans of regular 8-bound. And I've been finding I really enjoy like 4 mans of regular 8-bound because they still hit hard enough to matter, but they're not like such an investment that they have to get their points back or you're behind. And that style is pretty good, but you can add some extra sauce to it by, with your Khorne Demon detachment, bringing something like Bloodletters, which have a 3 dice charge at a deep strike, which is always super nice. And importantly, and I find this has been really, really good in playtesting, 2 Skull Cannons. So a Skull Cannon is 90 points. It ignores all forms of cover when it shoots. It still needs line of sight, but for instance, it can ignore dense cover and it can ignore light cover. And it has a very reasonable shooting attack at 90 points. It's 3 plus D3 shots with ignores cover, strength 8, AP 2, damage 2. So like literally premier anti-marine shoot. And on top of that, the Skull Cannon is incredibly tanky for its point cost because it has an unrendable, unchangeable 4+ demon save, a pretty reasonable toughness, and 9 wounds. And because of that,
Skull Cannon fan, a massive. As soon as the points change came through, like I was running them before the points change came through in the balanced data slate.
Yeah.
And then when that came through, I was like, oh well, now it's just a done deal. Like 3 of those in a list is sick.
It's a slam
3
dunk
as well as the Bloodthirster, but it's
and well, there's some goofy ways you can fit 3 in there, and I'll mention one in a second. But for this is kind of like what I would say is a standard version of Disciples of the Red Angels, or kind of what version I've been playing. I could only really fit because of power levels 2 Skull Cannons, the Bloodletters, and the Bloodthirster. But just having, let's say, 2 to 3 of them in your list provides you with a backfield anchor that shoots decently and did that exactly what we were talking about with the War Dogs without costing you an incredible premium to do it. So if you're already wanting something like the Bloodthirster, the Skull Cannon is a natural next step, in my opinion. Now, let's say, for sake of argument, I want to bring Angron, but I don't want to play Disciples of the Red Angel. There's still a list there, which does a lot of what we just talked about, where instead of really taking a lot of these smaller 8-bound units, you're kind of bringing a mix with some Khorne Berserkers. You're essentially just playing it without playing it. You're bringing Angron and you're bringing the Face Cap Bloodthirster, but you want access to some, stuff that you wouldn't otherwise get because of the Army of Renown restrictions.
Yeah.
In that style, there's actually a really good SKU list you can build around the named Forge World Khorne Demon Prince, Uraka the Warfiend.
Yep.
So one thing that's fantastic about Uraka is it has the old wording where it allows Khorne demons to reroll once.
Yeah.
And why that's incredible is that means you can provide reroll ones in your list to Skull Cannons, but also to things like Forge Fiends, Mauler Fiends, Khorne Lord of Skulls getting reroll ones is pretty cute. And so is something like a Khitan Rampager, which honestly at 400 points, them and the Greater Brass Scorpion are real SKU list builds. Like you could do a whole build based around Uraka, Angron, and then a lot of other bigger models where it's like, okay, this is a lot of wounds, deal with it. I'm going to push all of them in your deployment by turn 2.
Yeah.
And that style of build is super good in like a teams format, or if you've been having those big models sit collecting dust on your hobby shelf for.
Yeah,
So
well, behind me down there, I've got there's 3 brass scorpions down there.
let's go.
There's a couple Kaitans up there. I'm keen.
Yeah.
And then over here, we've got all the bloodthirsters for days. I'm definitely keen to test that list out.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far off topic before I get to our third World Eaters play style, but I will say that I've been playing the Greater Brass Scorpion with the Cogs of Ashdor Army of Renown recently.
Okay.
And it feels so good. It's like every game I'm just in awe that thing can do at 430 points. It's quite a great unit. So
yeah.
there's ideas. You can mess around with that. I think that's legitimate. So like your Rock of the Warfiend, the Phase Cap Bloodthirster, and then your third really spicy option for the HQ slot in a Demon's Detachment is just the standard Khorne Demon Prince with wings. And you can still take relics because that's actually not restricted in the Chaos Demon Codex.
Yeah.
You can choose Argath, King of Blades, on his sword, and now all of a sudden you get a damage for really spooky sword on your already really spooky Demon Prince that you can use kind of as a countercharge threat. So if I move, for instance, a unit of Khorne Berserkers onto a midfield objective, but they're behind cover, and I'm playing against somebody else who's bringing like, Vanguard vets or like an Orc player or something like that then charges to wipe my unit off that objective, the DP can move out its 12 inches with fly, get its charge, and pretty much easily ace any medium to soft unit in the game.
Yeah.
I
also think damage 4 is a really interesting breakpoint because it means all of those, there's like the Dark Angels Terminators being 3 wounds with the ability to go -1 damage, or, there's a lot of 3 wound models that have like a feel no pain save. So being able to go to 4 damage just means you are consistently cleaving through these really popular, hard targets. I really like that Demon Prince. And the fact that he's character protected means that your opponent can't really stop you, unless they put considerable resources into it. It's hard for them to stop you from doing that. Yeah,
I found a lot of games where like he just should die in theory, like math says he dies, but because obviously it's a dice game and demon saves are very swingy, your opponent will undercommit into him and he'll live.
Yeah.
And anytime that happens, it feels game-changing. So he is another option that I think is a fantastic option. So again, like if you're Disciples of the Red Angels or you're just kind of like a mix with Angron, Demon Allies are a perfect fit. They do everything that you want them to. They provide you with deep strike threats. They provide you with mid-board threats. They provide you with anchors in your deployment. Just feels like a real natural fit with the World Eaters Codex. And I do want to mention them also when it comes to that third list I mentioned, which is more of the like Berserker spam style where you have a lot of MSU. Khorne Demons are perfect in that style as well because, again, you like having things like the Skull Cannons as an option, as just like a backfield threat. And, it just provides you with more options and utility when it comes to things like your stratagems.
Yeah.
So as an example, the Khorne Demons themselves have a 1 CP strat to auto-deny a psychic power on a 4+. And having access to that strat is fantastic when you play into something like a psychic heavy army or something that relies on a psychic secondary like Eldar, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
especially if you pack in some Flesh Hounds, which are some of the most points efficient units in the game right now. So bring in a few units of Flesh Hounds and now you're denying that power on a 3+. Very, very strong.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I haven't mentioned Flesh Hounds. That they're pretty good, and points left over when I'm building my list. I usually 2 of them because they're just fast. They have a 12-inch move. They have a flamer on them. They're beasts, so they can move through walls. They're like the perfect skirmish on objectives early type of unit. So that's another thing that fits really naturally with what the World Eaters are trying to do. So, those are kind of like the 3 general archetypes of builds and some of the allies I think about when I get them. There's some other like goofy options out there in the ether. Like I believe you can bring Abaddon alongside your World Eaters as well. And I think there's kind of like a place for that in like in theory, if you were building a list that was kind of like MSU, but you have a lot of things that protect Abaddon, you could probably make that work.
Yeah.
Well,
one of
but
the
that's not
interesting
something I've
things
tried
that I
out
was
myself.
looking at earlier with Abaddon was he has an aura of +1 to your charge rolls. And then if you get +1 to your charge rolls from the Blood Tithe, you're now getting +2. And then the Berserkers can do a 3d6, drop the lowest. And when you combine that with the potential for a command point reroll should you fail, it's like a 99% chance you're making that charge from strategic reserves. So you can just go, cool, Abaddon and a unit of 10 come in from strategic reserves, and you can just bank on that making it in. And sometimes those guaranteed charges, and even if your opponent's got some kind of -2 to you, you're still very likely going to be making that charge.
Yeah, and I'll also say like a lot of the like core predators of Abaddon that exist in the meta have kind of gone the way of the dinosaur.
Yeah.
So as an example of that, like the thing that kind of kept Abaddon down when he was at 300 points was the Reaper Flying Hive Tyrant.
Yeah.
From Tyranids, and even when you see Tyranids today, after the nerfs, they aren't bringing the Flying Hive Tyrant with the Reaper of Blitteraxe anymore.
Yeah.
And that particular unit in competitive play kind of gate kept Abaddon lists from being the tippity top of the meta. Or at least in the people that were bringing Abaddon, it really provided good counterplay against him.
Yeah.
So we've moved into... It did, yeah. And we've moved into a era where you don't have to really worry about that as much. And since you don't have to worry about like agile melee threats that just absolutely nuke him from orbit in one activation, he gets a lot more time to do nasty stuff. And if it takes the opponent to turn 3 to be able to start shooting and doing damage to Abaddon, I feel like a lot of times you just win the game off of that, because by turn 3, he's going to be far enough up the table that he's going to get in their deployment, and he's going to toast most everything in the game with his melee.
Yeah, I think I've been playing Abaddon in Black Legion's list, and ever since Arcs of Omen, and I think in the last 16 games that I've played, he maybe died once. Because these days people just don't have the tools, and then therefore they just avoid him, and he just runs up their lines and just does what he does. I'm not entirely sure that Abaddon meshes well with the World Eaters, mainly because one of the good things about the World Eaters is their secondary, where every time a World Eaters unit kills an enemy model or an enemy unit, you get victory points. And Abaddon, he's going to be hogging those kills. He's going to be killing a bunch of stuff, which is not going to contribute to your victory points. So that combined with the fact that he has to be your Warlord, which means he invalidates the Lord Invocatus. If you do take him and Angron, you can make Angron the Warlord, because both of them have the must be the Warlord thing, in which case you can pick. So you could do that, but now you're talking, like 700 points worth of your list in these 2 models. It's like, so that's probably not the best way to go either.
Yeah, but Angron can bodyguard Abaddon.
That's true.
So that's, it's an expensive limousine to deliver him.
Yeah.
But, that's a goofy thing. I just mentioned that more as just it exists out there. You could probably mess around with it and find a way for that to be good. I too have been really enjoying Abaddon in the current meta, even with the points increase. I feel like in Black Legion, he's a slam dunk, as you mentioned. Especially because you can heal him in Black Legion. Like, a lot of people don't realize that, and then they'll see you do it, and then they'll be like, oh.
When your opponent finally goes, cool, we've done 7 wounds to him, he's only got 2 left, I can kill him next turn, and then you heal him for a D3, and you heal him up 2, so now he's got 4 wounds left, and they're like, no, it's 2 more phases.
It's pretty funny. Yeah. So, there's a lot of cool options out there. Like me personally, I was experimenting a lot with World Eaters, especially when the book first dropped. I played a ton of practice games. I try to play about 1 game a week when I have the availability, and that's a commitment I made to the game like a year ago.
Yeah.
And since the book has released, I think I've played either as or against World Eaters collectively about 11 times.
Okay.
Which is enough that I have a good feeling for the faction. but not enough that I feel like I've mastered any one of those 3 builds that we mentioned.
Yeah.
And I do feel, and I think I disagree with some of the comments I've seen, or analysis I've seen when it comes to World Eaters, and that I do feel that they're more than just a one-dimensional codex. I've seen a lot of people say things like, "Oh, it's just Lord Invocatus and 8-bound spam, and that's it." What a boring book. Which I don't actually think is the case. Like,
I don't think
after
that's the
having
case at all.
playtested this stuff, I feel like the diversity that you get, not just out of the codex itself, but out of just the menagerie of different options you can take. I mean, how many units have we already mentioned?
Yeah, there's so many. Like, especially when you start factoring in the allies component, there's actually so many builds. I actually recently went to a GT that I came second at. First time I took World Eaters to an event, and
Nice.
I had 2 Land Raiders in the list. And
Let's
I
go.
was just messing around. I was like, let's see, a couple Land Raiders full of Berserkers. This is the army I've wanted to play since I was 15, so let's see what happens. I was like, they're toughness 9, they got a 2-up save, should be right. And like, they did work. And I was like, so many people are out there going, oh my god, the only units in the book are 8-bound, Invocatus, and Berserkers. And it's just pulling the levers of those 3 units. And I'm like, well, hang on. Let's actually look at the other units in the book and see how does it synergize with the army. And a Land Raider in a World Eaters list is very different than a Land Raider in a Chaos Space Marine list or an Imperial list. Because in a Chaos Space Marine list, you've got tough units, so you don't necessarily need the Land Raider's protection. And, whereas the World Eaters, you can go, cool, I've got 10 Berserkers, they're really squishy, they're easy to kill. But if I put them in a Land Raider, all of a sudden they're really hard to kill, and then the Land Raider provides extra movement to them, it provides an ability to pop transports so that then the Berserkers can charge the stuff that was in the transport, whereas if you've just got Berserkers, you can't do that. There's tons of stuff a Land Raider does, and I'm like, surely there's, so I'm just playing around with these different options, and I think people need to open their minds a little bit and stop thinking of it as this closed book. Just because the 8-bound Invocatus, combo has done well, doesn't necessarily mean it's the only way to do well.
Right. I mean, you've heard of the Rhino boost, but what about that Land Raider launch? That's what we're really talking
about. It's got an
about.
assault ramp. Surely it's better.
Yeah. So, I agree fundamentally with what you just said. I think that the Invocatus build is easier to do well with. I will say that, because it is got a lot of its decisions down to a very easy binary in some ways of like, okay, where am I going to move these things turn 1? What do I want to charge? Do I commit them? Like, the base level of thinking to play that list to decent quality it's pretty approachable. It's pretty easy to pick up, especially when you first grab the codex. You don't have to learn all the new data sheets, all the new stratagems to maximize your potential. You can focus on the handful of good data sheets. So there's definitely, like, again, a lot to say about an army being easier to play. Armies with lots of moving parts that are difficult to play, no matter how good they are. And I feel like this is kind of leaning more into like the Berserker style or the Disciples of the Red Angel style, because they have a lot more moving parts for them. No matter how good they might be, you will see it lag in win rate if you're looking just like at global data. Than other options, because the other options are just easier to get your points in and win a majority of games across like a large data set. But if you're practicing quite a bit, I honestly think any one of those 3 builds we mentioned are very competitive. Like, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned getting second in a GT. I mean, I feel like getting second at any kind of event with Land Raiders is impressive. And I feel like any one of those builds we mentioned is good enough to make top cut at a major. So, I mean, this is part now. This is going to be a side divergence from the whole allies conversation, which is I want to talk a little bit about the way the community perceives and talks about chaos factions, but in more armies in general, which is we tend to see a big focus put on the bad things about an army when it first comes out. Like, what are its restrictions, or how does that compare to other factions? But at the end of the day, you're not other factions, you're your codex, and you need to look at it in context of itself. So one of my favorite examples
with that, I could not agree more with that statement. So many people, they compare a unit from this codex to a unit from that codex in a vacuum, And they go, well, that unit is just better than this unit in every way. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't have access to the stratagems that this one does. It doesn't have access to the allies and the other components in the list that this does. Just like what I was talking about with Land Raiders. Like, you can compare a Land Raider to, anything else and be like, yeah, Land Raider's overcosted. But it's like, yeah, but you put it in a World Eaters list, and all of a sudden that Land Raider does something fundamentally different than other things. It provides something to the list, and it means your Berserkers are now doing better things. It means that, if you put a couple Land Raiders in the list, you can shoot down that squad of Gaunts that are blocking your 8-bound charge, So now you can actually get your 8-bound in and do work, So it's a completely different beast. You can't compare it to anything else. So I think I completely agree. People make that mistake all the time, and it grinds my gears.
Yeah, my favorite example of this is an extreme, is Vashdor. So Vashdor's datasheet is obviously not the best datasheet in 9th edition. It reads like a 8th edition datasheet for the Chaos Demons Codex. And because of that, there is obviously going to be a lot of clowning on him. I've seen so many different Vashdor memes. But that perception of just his datasheet has led a lot of people to say, like, well, he's just terrible. Why would GW make this? And then I look at him and I'm like, yeah, that data sheet isn't the best. But then I look at his Army of Renown rule, and I'm like, oh, that's why. I mean, like, he completely makes up for it and then some when it comes to what the Cogs of Vashdor does.
Some of the stratagems that they have, comboing with their, their various traits, is very spicy.
So that's what I've been practicing recently, because I think I want to that to a teams tournament coming up.
Yep.
And the effectiveness of that kind of a skew list, where it's just demon engines and then a few characters that are infantry that will do like your actions for you. And just to briefly mention what I've been doing with it, I've been taking like a Greater Brass Scorpion, a Defiler, something like a Forge Fiend, 2 to 3 Decimators, like the Forge World unit.
I'm
super
a huge
good
Decimator fan.
Yeah, man, Mortal Wounds, let's go. And like Venom Crawlers, Blood Slaughterer.
I'm a huge fan of them too.
Yeah, man, because you can give him advance and charge. So Blood Slaughter moves 12 plus 6, moves 18-inch advance and charge with Cogs of Vashdor. And the whole faction, like, one of the things you can do is you can give a 5-up Feel No Pain to a unit. So you can give it to like your Brass Scorpion or your Decimator, whatever it is you're exposing, which adds huge survivability increasements. But then you have like a Master of Possession. You'll kind of stage your whole army around, and he'll cast Cursed Earth. So all of a sudden you have like 4-up invulns on all of your big tanks, and you just kind of like push everything up the table. My last game I played with it that I actually lost because I've won a few with it. My opponent and I both had 1 unit left at the end of turn 3.
Wow.
So it just experiment and play stuff is more or less my point, because you have to look at units not in just context of what they are, but what they do. So when I look at something like Vashdor, most people are like, oh, he's trash, he's garbage. I look at him like, he is a tax unit for one of the best armies in the Chaos Space Marine repertoire. So I just wanted to briefly mention that. A lot of people also will maybe not have success with one of any of these 3 styles we mentioned, and maybe that's not your play style, or maybe it just means like you need to practice with it a little.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for play styles. I actually did a video not too long ago talking about like really deep diving this, because I think a lot of people, what they do is they'll download a list from a recent GT winning list, or something from some with their favorite content creator or whatever. They'll download this amazing list that's really strong and it's refined by a player, and then they'll just pick it up and try to play it, and they won't get the results that they feel that they should get, given that somebody else has taken that list and won a GT, and they can't compute why. And it's because probably there's a few reasons. One of them will be that you didn't write the list, and therefore you don't fully understand why each unit is in there and what it's designed to do and how it's designed to work. And the other side to that coin is it might be a hyper-aggressive list, but you might be a reserved sort of cagey playstyle player. And therefore you're just not going to get the value out of it. Or inversely, They might have written this list that has, a bunch of units that are designed to stage, a bunch of rhinos with combat threats in them. They might have had all this stuff, strategic reserves, sequencing, that sort of stuff. But you might be a hyper aggressive player that just wants to go blah and blow everything up. And it doesn't matter how much, how good the results they get with that list are, you're not going to get those same results because your play style doesn't match. So I think people, people go way too hard on the copying of the top meta lists instead of defining your own meta. You come up with a list that you play well, refine it over time so that it meshes your play style, and define your own meta.
I think a good example of this is I tend to want to play that have some amount of fluff to them. That's just like I can't stop myself. Yeah. Literally, I had a moment with myself where I'm like, all right, this competitive year, Wallace, you don't have to just play Chaos. You can play whatever you want to play and just play the best thing and go win events with it.
Yeah.
And I had an event coming up for the Cherokee Open. I was playing a lot of Guard. I'm like, it's the best army of the game. But then I was looking at my models and I saw the Terrax Assault Drill, and I was like, okay, but I think it's really cool looking though, right? So I ended up playing Death Guard. Yeah. And I still got top chaos at the event, but I brought like a goofy mission play, like Harbinger style Death Guard build with like a lot of Poxwalkers and Plague Marines and stuff like that. And I just had a really good time, and the list felt so much better for me than the Astra Militarum one, because even though the Astra Militarum one was better, it was not the way I like to play the game.
Yes.
And I will say, if you're playing an army that on a fundamental level you don't appreciate, it will change your tournament experience as well. Like, I feel that enjoying the game that you're playing is incredibly important. And what I think is important to notice is people will still make decisions, even at the highest level, that are just decisions based on what they like rather than what is, the best in some kind of theoretical universe. So if you enjoy what you're playing or you like a certain play style, I really, really encourage everyone to pursue that. And I do think there's a place for that. Like, pretty much any conceptual play style, there's probably more than a handful of lists out there that fit that play style that would be very satisfying. So
yeah, well, that's why every time like somebody relatively new to the tournament scene gets into it, one of the first things that I recommend they do is go play a bunch of different armies first. Go play an aggressive combat Blood Angel style army, but then go and play some kind of like horde-based infantry, Tyranid objective control style thing, and then go and play, a Tau list that's just all about DACA. Play all of them, and then once you've played 4 or 5 different things, you'll know which one you enjoyed more. Don't look at your results. Don't look at which one won and which one didn't win and which one's doing well in the meta and which one's not. Just which one did you enjoy playing the most? And then you get an understanding of what your play style is going to be. And then you can sort of play around in that area. But just stick to that area. Find an area that you enjoy and stick to that area. Because if you're enjoying the game, you're more likely to play it regularly. And if you play it regularly, that's how you get good. Whereas if you don't enjoy it, but you're just trying really hard to win, that's, first of all, you're going to really hate it when you lose because your goal is to win, not to have fun. And as a result, you're not going to have fun, and therefore you're not going to want to play it very often, and therefore you're not going to get good, and therefore you're not going to win. That's sort of how I look at it.
So, I mean, like, I don't think the most optimum way to play World Eaters is bringing a big Chaos Knight as an ally, like something like the Abominant, like we mentioned.
Yeah.
But also, I don't think it's like entirely illegitimate. Like, if that's a model that you have that you really like, there's ways you can find to make that model more valuable in your approach to the game. So
yeah, absolutely.
So I guess on that point, I want to ask you really quickly, what do you think about what we've seen for 10th edition so
far? It's interesting. I mean, I don't know how long you've been playing 40k for, but I've been playing for like
5th.
Yeah, I've been playing since like 3rd. So I've gone through so many edition changes that one thing I've learned is not to make any judgments until you've got the whole book, the whole rule set in your hands. Don't make any judgments until then. Because the amount of times that you'll see a rule and you'll be like, I don't know about that, but then it turns out that was actually a really good rule. You just didn't have it in full context. So I'm kind of being reserved on what I think so far. I do like the idea of the streamlined profiles, and I do like the idea of, the simplified but not simple. One of my concerns, I guess, with 10th edition is that I think one of my favorite parts of the game is writing lists and writing
Yeah.
unique lists that are nothing like what anybody else is playing, coming up with really creative, cool ways to play the game. Like through most of 8th edition, I was running 2 Charybdis salt claws, which are
Salt claws.
the 20
Yeah.
transport drop pods with
My
with
man.
20 berserkers in each. And I was just dropping these big bombs and just going boom and then flooding the board with berserkers. And I was having so much fun, and I was getting really, really good results because nobody else was running a list even remotely similar to that. So the meta just didn't know what to do with it. So when I'd rock up, people were just blown away by it. And I had so much fun. It was such an exciting time to play 40k. And I worry that with, like, for example, with the World Eaters Codex, with the limited warlord traits, the limited stratagems, the limited, customization options, I worry that that's going to sap some of the fun out of the game in that regard. Like with the Chaos Space Marine Codex, I love the fact that we've got, so many different relics. Like you've got 6 relics for each legion and then like another 12 relics in the generic. Like the amount of combinations just on the relics and warlord traits is insane. And customizing it, creating you're almost like an RPG style. You're creating your character and he's your fancy guy who does his thing. I really enjoy doing that. I can understand why they would want to remove it because it can be a bit bloated, it can be a bit complex, and that I 100% agree with. But yeah, my concern is that that's one of my most favored memories of 40k is just coming up with these crazy lists. So I guess that's sort of where I sit with it at the moment.
I think I overall agree with what you said. So, one thing is I agree that we can't really make judgments about 10th edition where we don't even have the rule set yet. I do like what they've professed the direction to be, which is we're going to reduce how deadly things are. We're going to fiddle with like toughness values a little bit more.
Yeah.
That appeals to me. I liked somewhere between 7th edition's unkillable bricks of things and 8th edition's everything dies instantly. I like some kind of Goldilocks zone that we've at times experienced over the last like 3 or 4 editions.
Yeah.
And so the idea of things being a little bit less deadly appeals. The smaller army sizes I also think is a good direction for tournament play specifically because it's easier to pack all that stuff. So that's a little bit of a bias for me. But you're right about the simplification of a rule set does remove some of its flavor. And obviously returning to indexes, we're going to lose stuff. We're just going to lose, faction abilities. We're going to lose rules. We're going to lose stratagems. And, one thing I will reference is a little bit of a shameless plug. On my channel, I did an interview with Andy Chambers. Are you familiar with Andy?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. You've been in the scene long enough that you know. Andy Chambers was one of the people that helped create 40k as we know it today, and he was also the original writer for the first ever Chaos Codex. And one thing he brought up in my interview with him that I thought was a really interesting piece of philosophy in terms of game design that I hadn't really thought about was the fact that like you have to constantly walk a tightrope with your player base between a rule set being practical and like the simulationist part of that rule set. So, there are a lot of us that really just love the lore of the game and love the list building aspects that will enjoy when there is, in some ways a bloat of options or rules or ways to make our guys be our guys, I want my Chaos Warband to represent my specific kind of narrative for this warband. And then like it being practical as a rule set enough that you can play games with it that aren't, mired in obfuscation. Where it's like, yeah, almost there. Where the game isn't like just difficult and terminable to approach for like new players, tournament players, because there's even between you and me, I mean, I'm sure we both know this. When you walk up to a table, we are vaguely aware of what most of the armies in the game are going to do because we've played a lot of it. But like, I'll still grab somebody's list and I'll look at it and I'll be like, what the heck is that relic? Or I haven't looked at that profile before. Like, even if you were vaguely aware of the faction or read through the book several times, like you'll always be surprised by what people bring. And I feel like the more simulationist the game gets, the more like rules we add, the less and less you can even begin to know about what your opponent does, and the more it becomes kind of like just knowing what you do and not really focusing on what the opponent does, which I don't think is a great place for a game if the game wants to be competitive.
Yeah.
So
I really like the idea of having more universal stuff. You know,
yes,
so
me
instead
too.
of just having a couple of universal stratagems, like take things like Auspex Scan, make that a universal one. You know, take, you know, all of these various different stratagems that, you know, are the gotcha style stratagems. I like the idea of
Yeah.
making almost all of them universal. And that way you know what they are and you have access to them. So like you said, a lot of people, they just learn what they can do. Well, if you learn what you can do, well, chances are you're learning what your opponent can do as well, because most of it's universal. And then you just have like a
Right.
small amount of things to add a bit of flavor. I don't hate that. I think that's good. And I think even if they just had like, you know, 3 or 4 different overarching sort of sets of universal stratagems. So there's some stratagems that have, you know, you have to have XYZ keywords to access them. And then you can create, you know, interesting options within that area. I think that's fine.
Yeah. No, I think that I agree with that overall. So we'll see. I'm excited about it. And that probably we're not going to have until like June or whatever. So there'll be a lot of time for them to slowly leak things, so that we can get a better idea how things are going. So I guess on that note, what is your plan for the next 3 months?
For me, I'm pretty much going to be mainlining World Eaters up until 10th edition. So
Let's
I've had
go.
I've had plenty of you know, solid results with the Black Legion. I've done all of the different CSM legions. One of the things I did when that book came out was I said each event I was going to run a different legion. So I ran, you know, Night Lords, I ran Alpha Legion, I ran Creations of Bile. Like I did each event, I did a different legion. And then I landed on Black Legion, and then I did really, really well with those at a few events, so I decided to just keep going with them. But now that we've got a World Eaters book, it's the book I've been waiting for since I was 15. You know, World Eaters was my first ever army. I've got about 60,000 points worth of World Eaters behind me, so I've been waiting for this. So it would be, you know, it wouldn't be right if I didn't go hard on it all the way up until 10th edition. And then depending on what 10th edition brings, I'll either, you know, pivot into some meta stuff and try to, you know, keep pushing for those tournament wins, or I'll go, you know what, this is a silly event, a silly edition that's just going to be fun, and I'll just play around with the World Eaters and see what I can come up with and try to go for maybe best in faction World Eaters or something like that. So yeah, that's sort of my plans. What about yourself?
Oh man. So for me personally, it's been weird because this is a transitionary period for me. So I've gone a little bit from being like the competitive player that is at every big event to being more of a person behind the scenes that helps organize events.
Yep.
So one of my things, and this should be public by the time that this video comes out. We have decided to do kind of like a East tournament circuit called the UTC here in the United States. And my focus has been getting stores, like kind of recruiting stores and other tournament organizers to kind of own whole conference, like a big event at the end of the year, like invitational style, and get a bunch of stores on board. I think right now we're at about like 50 or so events that have already signed on to be a part of the tournament circuit, which is
that's
pretty
exciting.
good. That's sizable. Yeah, it's very exciting. So that's something that I've been working on. I'm the commissioner for that particular organization, and I've been working with some of the big names in the hobby space to build this. So I'm very excited about that, and it does absorb a lot of my time. I still, again, play like that one game a week that I promised myself I would, but I'm not going to have as much time to go to events as I normally would. Like I planned on being like at the Alamo GT and a few other larger ones recently, but I just really don't have time to go. So my focus is going to be on the next 3 months to stores, meeting with people, you know, helping to build like the community from that side of things.
Yep.
And then probably making more like live battle report content, that kind of stuff. It's been something I've been messing around with recently, which is its own whole beast. So when it comes to tournaments, my very next event I will be playing in is going to be a team event, and I'm probably going to play Cogs of Ashdor because I've been practicing that a lot. And then in May, I am attending a Warhammer World Championship qualifier event. I'm going to be playing the Warp Meld Pact. So getting ready to roll out my 100 Zangor. So got to practice that a bit. Yeah. Very excited about that. I love Horde armies. That's always been me. So this will be my second year of bringing that list out and at this particular event. And I think it'll be a good time. So we'll see how it goes.
Sounds good. All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything that you want to sort of plug or any sort of upcoming content that you want to talk about before we sort of wrap it up?
No. Probably if you are watching this video and you're not subscribed to Blog for the Blood God or Warphammer, you should probably subscribe to both of us. That would be super cool of you.
Yep.
I'll
spam some links down below of all the sort of stuff that we've been covering so that nothing gets missed and that you don't have to search for anything. But yeah, thanks heaps for coming on, man. I really appreciate your time. It was a great chat. Hopefully the people watching this learnt a lot about, particularly around that Allies for the World Eaters stuff, but also the conversations about the Vashtor and, all the different meta-related content that we just covered off is all really good stuff. So I appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate you too, buddy.
Alrighty, thanks, man. All right, well, everyone who watched this video, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, subscribe, all that good shit. And check out the links below if you want to show your support to the two channels that brought this video to you today. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Blog for the Blood God.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel